What I wanted to talk about was an observation that came to the surface as I was feeling a little bit knotted, meaning tension, after sending out my latest issue of my newsletter. And I haven't felt that way in a while with my newsletters. I feel like it's not that familiar because it's not a recent feeling for me. I'm usually filled with just a lot of joy and sharing because my newsletters have mostly been about my art lately. But, in the last few weeks I've transitioned into really diving back into the heart of what I really feel I'm here to do, which is to connect my unique life experience with a unique need in the world that only I can serve based on my unique experience. And in so many ways I've known what that is, and in so many ways I've resisted really doing it. Not intentionally, but it's just I've experienced resistance. And what occurred to me this evening as I was sitting with that knotted up feeling again, because it's sort of my my indicator that I'm stepping into the juicy territory of my life and where the life is. So I'm not turning away from it. I actually took the time to allow it to flow through me and reveal itself to me this evening. So I was really honest about what I was experiencing. And what occurred to me is that it's really easy to read in the creativity books about artists and entrepreneurs boldly and brashly making statements like, ignore everybody. That's Hugh MacLeod, the gaping void artist. Or, get over your fear of asking, Amanda Palmer, Art of Asking. Or, listen only to yourself, forget about what everyone else thinks. So this is something that a lot of entrepreneurs say over and over again in their newsletters and in their books and in their classes. And then this other term that I find kind of comical about self-sabotage, which in my experience, it's like, I don't think it's ever really self-sabotage. It's all information. And so when I hear self-sabotage, I think, oh my God, I'm doing something to cut myself off at the knees. I need to stop that, stop that. And I sort of like wave my finger at the part of myself that's sabotaging myself, like it's the enemy, or like it's something that I need to overcome. But as I sat with my own feelings of tension this evening and really felt them, what I noticed is that some of us on the planet really, really will feel a great deal of resistance when it comes to the moment that we are about to speak a truth that may not have been spoken for generations. And maybe at the core of our very existence at this moment in time, that those generations stayed silent in order that we may be alive today. So the evolutionary impulse on the survival level up to this moment in time may have been silencing, censoring, and suppressing. And this all came to me, and I realized that this is exactly what I am being called to share right now at this moment in time, because this is unique to me. And of course, I know I'm not the only one with this evolutionary imprint. But instead of trying to come up with a strategy to either psychologize or strategize that feeling away. Because that has just really resulted in my feeling inadequate most of the time, or insufficiently workshopped or trained or elevated. So by sitting with it for almost, the first time maybe, and every time we experience something from a new consciousness, it's like it's happening for the first time. So this particular tension, which I was like, who am I trying to please here? Who am I feeling like I'm betraying and disappointing by stepping into this truth, this next layer of truth for me, which is to embody all of my experiences, not just at the circumstantial level, but now seeing kind of ancestrally what has led to my being on this planet. I see that that my direct ancestors, and we're not talking about thousands of years ago, we're just talking about maybe 100 years ago, so 2 generations ago, their lives were threatened by the act of speaking out and sharing their authentic truth, voicing an opinion, a perspective that's uniquely theirs. So my grandfather was an academic in China, a modern Chinese historian who is actively writing works that could be seen as critical, as critiques of the evolution of the regime and the coming into power of the communists. And that led him to choose to take his family of 4 children, ranging in age from 2 to 8 at the time, and to get on a boat to the nearest island, which was Taiwan, my mother being 6 years old, while the rest of his siblings stayed in China in various levels of high education and standing in that pre-communist regime. What I only found out, so this was in 1949, my mother never went back to China until maybe 15 years ago, so when she was maybe in her 50s. My grandfather returned only once more in his lifetime when he was in his late 80s, early 90s. So he did see it one more time before he died. But we're talking about half a century that went by where this displacement, that there was such a detachment from a sense of belonging, a sense of home, and a sense of voice, because all of that fleeing was because of the threat of speaking out, the survival issue about speaking out. He later went on to write many books and become a professor in Taiwan, and continued to have contact with his students when he moved to the United States. He died in a little apartment in Libertyville, Illinois, which is the town that I happened to grow up in and where my parents ended up, where they could care for him in his later years. And so, there he is, buried in Libertyville, Illinois, USA, because of the real survival threat to those who spoke out. So let me tell you that I only heard within the last 3 months, so 2014, Half Moon Bay, California, I happened to be flipping through my mom's iPad and I find some pictures that are black and white, and they're groups of people, clearly Chinese people, and I ask who they are, and she begins to tell me the story of this picture. And it turns out these are 2 of my grandfather's brothers, so her uncles, who did not leave China, and their spouses and their kids, so her cousins. And those cousins have now had children that are studying as graduate students in the United States. So it took them 2 more generations to have immigration. And that generation recently met up with my parents in Chicago. And there was a lot of story exchange. And what I found out through my mom was that that whole family, my grandfather's brothers, were affected by my grandfather's decision to leave and to essentially say no to the communist regime. So his voice, which wasn't even spoken, his voice came through the action of rebellion or taking a stand against what was happening, impacted them in the form of one of them being sent off for, quote, re-education in the countryside, and he having been a physician, he was sent to be a farmer for a number of years. And the other was a government official of some kind who, because of my grandfather, was given some sort of a disadvantage, or it wasn't promoted as high as he could go because he had this family member that was not viewed as loyal to the regime. And then I also heard the sidebar story that my grandmother's brother was treated in the same way, not being given the full advantages of his own merit because he had a sister who went to Taiwan, defected. So there's these ripple effects that just we never heard about, and my mother never talked about, and they never had contact with these members of the family for 50 years or more. And it all had its roots in my grandfather's perceived radicalism in terms of his viewpoints and his position as someone who had the power of the pen and an audience and the respect of people who would read his works. Of course, I don't even know what these opinions were, or I couldn't even begin to read them because they're all written in Chinese, over 40 books. But every once in a while, I'll get some contact from someone who knows him and studied with him or read his books and read one of his autobiographies where he wrote down, well, this is actually the story of how my mom's cousins' kids found them in Libertyville. Apparently my grandfather wrote an autobiography late in his life where he wrote down what all of his kids were doing, or their names, who they'd married, and where they lived. So they read in the index that, my mom, his daughter, had married my dad, and they lived in Libertyville, and they're still there. And so they were able to be found. And this picture, I'm going to go back to this black and white picture on my mom's iPad that she had scanned in after their visit, it was like from a Ken Burns documentary. I mean, the people had the communist clothing, like with the high collars and the little stars and the hats, and everyone looked androgynous. The women looked very androgynous, and this was an alternative pathway of evolution. And I sit here now with this recognition that it's non-trivial to face the resistance of speaking your truth and standing in your truth, no matter what it's for. I mean, what I'm saying really has very little political significance compared to what my grandfather was talking about at the time. But I noticed that my ideas, to me, seem no less potentially controversial and no less frightening in terms of how I feel bringing radical ideas into an environment that I can only assume is hostile without further proof. And why is that? And is it something that I just need to meditate away or buy the next workshop to come up with the tool that's going to reverse that mindset? Or is it something that I simply experience, observe, and note and express that is my reality and that's my process of evolution because I carry it. I carry the intensity of that act of courage in me and the significance of overcoming everything in that is not to be ignored. It's to actually be experienced and acknowledged in reverence to the evolutionary impulse that enabled me to be alive in this body today. And I just I'm feeling the intensity of that right now as I speak it. Because I'm all of a sudden feeling so connected to these acts of courage that were committed so far back, but not so far back in time to enable me to speak these words right now, to have them come through me. Even with the tension that I'm feeling, they can come to me and be spread with freedom into the space to be found and consumed by whoever finds and consumes it. And I can do that without fear of my own survival today, because others that came just before me were willing to stand in the face of the threat of their own survival and stand for their own voice. So this is what, to me, that's outrageous love. Outrageous love is taking a stand for your voice by being willing to do whatever it takes, taking your family on a boat and leaving for the sake of future generations having the freedom to speak their voice is outrageous love. And the obligation that we're talking about in Unique Self, for me, is the obligation to see what was at stake at that time, and what's at stake for me are so different because of outrageous love. And what is my specific obligation in this moment? It's to step into the next level of thriving, to add my voice and to stand for my voice at the evolutionary time point that I'm at right now, for me personally, as a way of fully expressing and fully honoring the entire lineage with all of its branches and all of its ripples that came before me and enables me to speak right now. That is the obligation of outrageous love. So I look forward to experiencing that resistance and being reminded so viscerally and acutely that many people have come before me and have stood for the value of the unique voice and perspective. And I'm not alone in that, and it's my obligation and joy and love to continue that, to continue to stand for the unique perspective and the voice, my voice. Thanks for listening.